Story number 1. Hello, guys. My name is Jake, and I have a story to tell you. Have you ever heard of those strange and exaggerated stories about Uber drivers? You know, those stories where ghosts get in the cars, or you can see shadowy shadow people while the drivers are on the road. I know some of the people who upload those videos, and I'm sorry to inform you that all of that is a lie. They do it just to gain views. What not everyone knows is that some Uber drivers, like me and others, have many real stories to tell. Stories where much worse things happen than ghosts or shadows wandering around our cars. And the worst stories? There are no ghosts, there are humans. With that said, I will tell you my story. It all started one Saturday night. That day was the day I wanted to work the most, since I didn't see my friends, and I was sure, I was going to have a lot of trips at a very high price. I was taking a couple to their house, which I must admit was in a very secluded place. But the couple was nice, and once I got there, I could go back to my house, and it was not too far from that place. I dropped the couple off at their house. They ran to the door for fear of being robbed. I was about to turn off the Uber for the day, but suddenly it started ringing again. Something caught my attention, and I was tempted. The new rider seemed to be really close to home. How much would it cost me to make one more trip and go about 3 blocks away? Plus, I'd be closer to the trip goal Uber gives me. I went about 5 blocks away to look for the customer. His name was Richard. He looked like an average middle-aged man, the kind of guy who gets in your car and starts talking about last Sunday's football game. I stopped the car on an avenue and waited for him. I must admit that something happened to me that didn't happen to me very often. I was scared. It was one of the first times I had ever seen such a deserted avenue. To top it off, the customer was taking a few minutes, and if he continued to be late, I was going to have to cancel him. I kept looking at the app's clock, waiting for his time limit to start for the trip, so I could cancel him. But just before the app alerted me that 5 minutes had passed, the car door opened. Hello, sorry I'm late. The woman who had just gotten in wasn't huge, she wasn't imposing, she wasn't strong, and she wasn't accompanied, but there was something about her that made me very uncomfortable. It was as if her eyes were telling me that she did not have any good intentions towards me. I felt small, tiny. What was happening to me? First, I was scared of an empty avenue, and now of a passenger who only smiled at me. Surely I was tired. Hello, what's the name on the account? Oh yes, sorry I forgot to tell you. It's Richard Keith 85. It's my boyfriend's account. To my surprise, this was correct. Maybe he was the one in the picture, but he really looked very different in it. After I asked him if it was him, Richard laughed and told me that it looked like a different person, but it was him. His answer satisfied me, and I started the car, not knowing what was in store for me. Once the trip began, I realized that I should have never accepted it. The woman wasn't really doing anything wrong. She was just looking at me. She looked at me with a huge, terrifying smile that never seemed to leave her face. Her eyes seemed to be fixed on my mirror, through which she was looking at me from the darkness of the car. She didn't say a word. Hell, it was like she was a statue, not breathing. She was frozen. Uncomfortable, I thought of talking to her to cut the tension. What a dark night, wasn't it? It was the only thing I could think of to say. I was never good at socializing. Yes, too dark. You know, I haven't eaten all day. Could I? As long as you don't mess up the car, I have no problem. Actually, I did have a problem. I never let anyone eat in the car, but I didn't want to get in trouble, not with this woman. I turned my attention back to the road, but I couldn't help but overhear something. It was the sound of this woman eating. But what was she eating so obsessively? She was really hungry. As soon as I looked up to see her in the mirror, I gasped in amazement and disbelief. The woman was eating a rat. She had it in both hands and was eating it savagely, as if she were a wild animal. As soon as I saw her, I stopped the car and threw up out the window. I opened the door and fell to the ground on my knees while I heard the woman behind me laughing. It was a joke. It's not real. Look. Suddenly, the girl threw the dead rat at me, and it landed next to me. The rat was real. It was too real. I stood up angrily, ready to get in my car and leave, ready to leave this crazy woman behind and accelerate the car as soon as possible. I tried to stand up, but suddenly, I felt an intense pain that made me fall to the ground and scream. When I turned around, I could see the psychopath with a small kitchen knife in her hand. She had cut my ankle. I tried to stand up and fall to the ground. I screamed as loud as I could, but there was no use. There were a few neighbors in the area, but I didn't see any lights on. What I did see was that some windows were slowly opening and looking at us. Those people knew what was happening. They wanted to spy on me, to see what was going on, but no one interceded. I could only see some people with their phones in their hands. Some were calling the police, others were filming. But none of that was going to help me. I needed someone to protect me as soon as possible. I tried to grab my attacker by the feet and throw her to the ground, but it was pointless. She dodged me easily and, laughing, she looked at me with the same dead eye she was looking at me with in the car. You know, I'm still hungry. Suddenly, the psycho threw herself to the ground, and before I could understand what she was about to do, she lunged towards my injured ankle and bit violently. At that moment, the girl stopped looking like a woman. She was like a wild animal, refusing to let go of a piece of meat she was trying to devour. I kicked her face with my other foot as hard as I could, but there was no point. She kept biting my foot like a tick. Suddenly, she let go of me on her own, but before she did, I felt an even stronger pain in my foot. I crawled back to the car, and for some reason, she was no longer chasing me. She just looked at me with a huge smile on her face as she chewed on something. Once I got in the car, I could figure out what was going on. She had ripped off a piece of my ankle with her teeth and was eating it with a huge smile on her face. It was at that moment I used my other foot to start the car and accelerated as fast as I could. Before the car started, I could see the girl laughing as she waved at me as I drove away. My car sped off, and a few blocks later, a policeman passed me and pulled me over. As the cop approached my door, I began to feel more and more dizzy until before I could roll down the window, I passed out. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed with a nurse in front of me. She called the doctor, and when he came, he told me everything that had happened. That policeman who had found me was on his way to where everything had happened, responding to a neighbor's call. When he found me, he had to take me directly to the hospital as I had lost a lot of blood. With the description I gave them soon after, they found that girl on the same dark avenue where I picked her up with my car. Once captured, she confessed everything with a big smile and pride. You know what the worst part was? The main charge they charged her with wasn't trying to eat my foot. It was murder. Remember that originally the Uber was for a man named Richard. That man was not the psycho's boyfriend. Shortly after I arrived at the hospital, they found the man's dismembered body in the alley near where I picked up the girl. Next to the body, the word tasty was written in blood. Story number 2. Have you ever thought about how dangerous it is to ride in an Uber? We all tend to naturalize it, but we never think about how dangerous it is to get into a stranger's car. I know many times we are safe. We have the name and picture of the driver, and we can share our location with our family and friends. But sometimes, no matter what safety precautions you can take, sometimes you can get locked up with a psychopath, and at that point, there is nothing and no one that can save you. It all started on a day when I was coming home from work. I didn't feel like taking a bus back, and I felt that I was safer taking an Uber. Now that I think about it, this doesn't make much sense, since the way to my house is very busy, and there are always a lot of people on the bus anyway. Once I ordered the Uber, I noticed that the person who was going to take me was a woman, which put my mind at ease. I was leaving work, and the app detected that the car would arrive in 4 minutes. I grabbed my stuff and ran downstairs, and as soon as I got there, the Uber app said it was going to take 5 minutes. I mean, this is usually nothing to worry about. Maybe the driver had gotten sidetracked for some reason, but looking back on it today, I keep telling myself that was a little clue about the person who would be my driver that night. Once the woman arrived after a few minutes, she acted as if nothing had happened and with a strange smile, opened the door for me without saying a word. I innocently hopped in, thinking that I would finally get home and enjoy the weekend relaxing. The trip started like any other. I was looking at my cell phone, and the woman was just driving. I must admit that she wasn't the best driver in the world. She seemed a bit lost and was constantly looking at the GPS as if she didn't understand how it worked, even though the Uber app said that she had more than 1,000 trips. I kept focused on my own. I didn't want to be too snoopy. As long as she took me home, she could look at the GPS all she wanted. But it was at that moment that something strange happened. I stopped looking at my cell phone for a moment because I felt like someone was watching me, and I didn't have to look too hard to see who it was. The driver was turned around facing me. She wasn't even looking at me through her mirror. She was staring at me, making eye-to-eye contact with me. While doing this, she wasn't looking at the road. Is there a problem? You're not looking at the road. No, I'm just appreciating you. You're really cute, you know? Thank you, but please watch the road. Of course, trust me. I'm a professional. And again, the woman took the wheel and looked straight ahead. It was at that moment that I realized something. The GPS route was constantly updating. According to the clock, we were getting further and further away from my house. It was then that I started to get very nervous. Hey, my house isn't this way. Are you lost? Because I can tell you how to get laughter. There suddenly the girl began to laugh like a psychopath. Her eyes were darting from side to side, and she was laughing very exaggeratedly, with her mouth open. I can't tell you how scared I was at that moment. I felt my blood pressure drop. I couldn't breathe, and my chest started to hurt a lot. The driver in front of me seemed to be going totally crazy. From one moment to the next, she started banging her head against the steering wheel, not stopping laughing at any moment. It was at that moment that something completely unexpected happened. While she was hitting her head, all her hair fell out. No, that wasn't hair. That was a wig. It was at that moment when the driver turned around with a huge bruise on her forehead and a big, shiny, hairless head that I realized something else. The person who was giving me a ride was not a woman. It was a man pretending to be a woman. My only reaction was to despair. The doors were closed, and the windows were locked. None of them were down. I kicked the window as hard as I could, but I couldn't escape. I was trapped in a car with a psychopath who seemed to be completely insane, but still, he had tricked me into getting in the car with him. As I realized all these things, the man just looked at me, laughing, as if enjoying my desperation, as if knowing that whatever I did, I was trapped in the car with him. What do you want from me? Please let me go. What do I want from you? Well, the obvious. I want to take you home and have you give me a 5-star rating. I like to drive, but I barely learned. My sister didn't want to teach me. She said I couldn't drive a car. You don't have to take me home. We're too close now. You can slow down and leave me here. No, my sister always came all the way home. I'll drop you off at your place. Is that why you put on a wig, to imitate your sister? Laughter. Wig? This is not a wig. That's her hair. As soon as he told me that, I took another good look at the wig lying on the floor. This man was right. On the bottom of the wig was human skin and blood. Could it be what I thought? Could it be that this man had skinned his own sister? Having said that, the man sped up even faster and faster. We were on a normal street, and the man didn't even look every time we crossed the street. It was only a matter of time before we hit something. I started to get desperate. I tried to grab the steering wheel, but the man nudged me out of the way with his elbow in my eye. I fell against the back seat and jumped out to attack him, but that only made things worse. The man pulled away from the driver's seat and choked me hard. You know what the worst part was? The whole time, he never took his foot off the gas. The car was still speeding down the middle of the street. You don't trust me either, don't you? Think I can't give you a ride home? Are you also like my sister? Are you going to send me back to the hospital for the insane? I won't allow it. No. No one will ever tell me what to do again. The pressure on his hands was getting stronger and stronger. I was losing my breath, and I couldn't breathe anymore. I felt like I was going to faint when suddenly lights appeared in the side window, and that's all I remember. Apparently, the obvious happened. A car hit us, and we were in a terrible traffic accident. My body was all bruised and injured, but I was alive. Not as lucky as me was the driver who died on the way to the hospital. Over time, I learned a lot about him. He wasn't a bad person, but he didn't get the support he needed from his family and soon lost his mind. That's when the man killed his sister, the Uber driver who wanted to send him to a psychiatric hospital. She was the only family member who cared about him and wanted him to get the help he needed. And for that, she paid top dollar. For my part, I never got into an Uber again. From that day on, I only travel in cars of people I know, and when no one can take me home, I just take the bus, where there are a lot of people, and I know that the chances of something happening to me are much,